Welcome to this. Welcome to this talk about overcoming bias in the. Oh, I just got a notification. Just got a notification. Sorry. Welcome to this talk about overcoming bias in the hiring process. I will be leading the talk. My name is Katherine McCord. I run an HR and talent acquisition inclusive focused company called Titan Management. I also have an anti-bias applicant tracking technology that I designed and developed called Titan ATS. Which has just started to go public. So we're very excited about that. So that's who I am and kind of what I've been doing for the last however long. I've been around HR for many, many years. I have done a lot of talks about neurodiversity. It's kind of a specialty of mine because I find it fascinating and also because I myself am neurodiverse. So I do a lot of talks around that, but I also have other diversities as well. So one of the first things that I like to talk about is that diversity can mean so many different things. And there's a lot of intersectionality, which means a lot of kind of crossover between the different diversities, right? So most people are not just one diversity, they tend to have multiple diversities. So diversity can be anything from the obvious, race, gender, sexuality, neurodiversity, physical diversity, age diversity, all the way to things that are far less obvious, like veteran status or military status, socioeconomic background, and so on and so forth. So there are religion, things like that. So there are many different types of diversity out there in the world, right? And because our little human brains are programmed to like certain things and not like certain things, we have developed biases, right? So we're going to be talking a lot about that and how to overcome the negative biases that we may encounter in the hiring process. And as somebody who's worked in talent acquisition and consulted in it for many, many years, I could tell you this is a very real thing. If somebody ever tries to tell you that bias and discrimination are not a problem in the hiring process, they have lost their minds. Or they don't know what they're talking about. I don't know which, but either way, they certainly are incorrect. So I want to kind of start off by letting everybody know that if you have a question, those who are actually here in the chat with us, please feel free to pipe up and ask. I do not mind being interrupted at all. So if you have a question about anything I'm saying, if you want to ask questions about things that are specific to you, which may help other people as well, please feel free to chime in. I'm always very happy to participate, to have participants in the conversation. So we're going to be talking again about overcoming bias in the hire process. So this is something that I get asked about a whole lot. On LinkedIn and when I do podcasts and things like that. It's something that a lot of people experience. And it's very frustrating because there's very rarely, in fact, you know what? No, not really. There's never really a reason for it, right? Because every human is different. So some of the things that we see a lot in the hiring process that are very common types of discrimination are sadly, we still get told as recruiters, as recruiting professionals, we only want to see people from this demographic. And yes, that can be illegal, but it does still happen. I've actually gotten emails from hiring managers over the years requesting, and don't worry, I did report them for this, requesting only certain races, certain genders, people in certain ages, avoiding certain religions. I've had these things actually requested of me, and I know many, many, many other recruiters who have as well. So this is something that's very difficult to deal with because it can be very overt and it can also be very subtle. So I'm going to kind of talk about those differences. So the first thing that a lot of people want to know is, what are some of the types of discrimination that are common? So I'm going to start with the application process. So when you go through an application process, sometimes at the end, they're going to ask about especially here in America, they will ask you about your race, your gender, whether or not you have a disability. They should never ask what your disability is. That's actually That's actually counterproductive. That goes the other way. They may ask a few other questions as well. These types of questions tend to be part of what's called either an EEO survey if you're in the United States, or a compliance survey of some sort based on wherever you are in the world. It's always some sort of compliance. When those are taken, they're actually very rarely seen by the hiring team. Very, very rarely. So that's one thing that you can just put your mind at ease about. So if you have the option to decline to answer, feel free to use it, because they're really not going to look at it that much anyway. That's something that a lot of people are confused about. And that's actually a great opportunity to just kind of push aside any potential for discrimination in case somebody goes and tries to look at the information later. So the application process, it can also have other types of bias, right? So one of the things that can cause discrimination is name. So that can identify your gender. It can identify sometimes your nationality or your race. Or that's the perception, at least, although trust me, many years, names are not always a giveaway. But I do want to encourage people, because there has been a lot of, tragically, success from people changing their names on their resumes in order to find success and to get traction in the application process. I want to discourage that for multiple reasons. Number one, ultimately, it doesn't work. If they're that crummy that they're going to be that prejudicial, you don't want to go through all that. You also don't want to be accused of lying in your application, and you don't want to have to hide who you are. That's not mentally healthy for you. So I don't want to encourage that at all. If you are concerned about your name causing some sort of prejudice based on where you live, based on perceived racial assignment based on your name, things like that, and again, those assumptions are not always correct, then what I would recommend is focus on companies where you know that's not going to be a problem. Okay, so look at companies who are known for their diversity, look at companies who are known for acceptance, and kind of roll with that. You can also avoid putting a full name. Some people like to put their first, middle, maiden, last, just a really long name. You should actually condense that as much as possible, and try to be a little bit more specific in most countries. Some countries do want you to put your full name. So if that's specific to you, yay, great. But this is a recommendation for a lot of people, like in EU, North America, South America, things like that. So you want to use first and last only. But outside of that, don't change your name. And I'm sorry, I don't have a better tip for you there, but that one is just a good one to just not roll with. Another one that comes up a lot are employment gaps. So if you have a gap in employment, a space in between jobs where you maybe were laid off, COVID happened, we all just kind of experienced that, right? Maybe you took time off to be a caretaker, maybe you became a parent, maybe you went back to school, whatever it is. Employment gaps can cause problems, and they do create a lot of bias. So one of the things that I like to encourage people to do is, not in your employment section, but somewhere on the resume, explain anything that you did during the gap that links you to that links into your profession, right? So did you do some online learning? Did you do some speaking? Did you do something else that's relevant to volunteer work of any kind? That can be very, very helpful. Another thing with dates can be age. So the sad thing is, ageism is one of the worst types of prejudice out there right now. So when you're looking at your resume, and sadly, it's dropped to about 45, believe it or not. People are getting really weird about people over the age of 45, which is insane, especially over 50. And so one thing that you want to do is make sure your resume only goes back a decade or less. So don't overtly date yourself. Plus, I'll also tell you that, very honestly, anything older than 10 years is not relevant, or at least it's not viewed that way. Okay. So don't put it. 10 years, newer. You can also, unless of course there are legal reasons that you need to. So if like some government contractors want you to be real specific and go back a certain number of years, that's fine. Feel free to do that. But in most cases, 10 years or less. And in a lot of countries, you do not need to actually put the dates that you graduated. There's no actual reason to do that. So just put what your education is. You don't necessarily need to put a graduation date. If you put that you have an MBA or a BS or a PhD, they'll realize that you graduated. The year doesn't really matter. So those are some things that you can do on your resume. So then you get to the interview process, right? I recently had somebody, and this really broke my heart. This really, really broke my heart. I recently had somebody call me and they said, I really need your help, Catherine. I don't know what to do with this. I said, okay, what happened? And she said, I went to the interview and I let them know that I needed to take notes. And they looked at me and said, are you stupid? And first of all, if a company says that, turn around, walk out, and report them to everybody you can possibly find because they are awful humans, and should not be interviewing or in business for any reason whatsoever. Asking for accommodations is a very tricky subject. And I want to address that first because it's something that's very commonly needed. So between physical diversities, including hearing impairment, you'll notice this headset that I wear, I can't hear for anything. I am super deaf. So for day-to-day things, I'm fine. But for the most part, sometimes I do struggle. I do a lot of lip reading, but when it comes to technology and speeches and stuff like that, I really need to be able to focus. It's also part of my neurodiversity. So I use a headset. So I do definitely understand. I have a mother with rheumatoid arthritis who's got all kinds of physical challenges that she has to overcome. So I know what it's like. From a very personal standpoint, I have a seizure disorder as well. So I've had to deal with that when it comes to clients, interviews, all of that kind of thing. So I know what it's like. And over 50% of the population can benefit from some kind of accommodation, whether it's for vision, hearing impairment, some other physical diagnosis, a neurodiverse diagnosis, just age can cause certain things to go. So it's very common to need an accommodation. These are things that are not unusual, and yet we've completely stigmatized them in the workplace. So I get asked a lot, hey, how do I ask for an accommodation without being discriminated against? So let's talk about that. So first of all, companies need to make accommodation standard. Just going to put that out there. Needs to be happening anywhere you work. Please push for that. But when that's not the case, first of all, if it's not time to need the accommodation, don't bring it up. In other words, if you don't need it in the application process, don't bring it up there. If you don't need it in the interview process or in one particular stage of the interview process, don't bring it up there. If you don't need it until you're hired, don't bring it up until that offer letter is signed. That's my advice. Don't bring it up until it's actually something to be needed. When it is time to bring it up. So let's say it's your first Zoom interview and you need, I don't know, auto captions or something like that. The best way to handle it is to just practically say what you need. You don't need to tell them your diagnosis. That's a big thing that can actually help with overcoming the bias, is just you don't need to overshare, just like they don't need to over ask. You don't need to overshare. So when it comes time to ask, you could say something like, hi, I'm so excited about my upcoming interview. Sometimes it's a little hard for me to hear on these Zooms. Would you mind if we use this auto caption app that I have so I can make sure and catch everything that you say? It'll help me to be productive in the interview. Voila. It tells them why you need it, what you need. And if you have a solution already, that's really best. If it's something that you can provide, that's the most helpful thing. If it's something you need from them, that's fine as well. Just give them a 1 to 2 sentence explanation of what you need, why you need it, within reason. Again, you don't need to tell your diagnosis. That is not their business. And then say something that's positive about it. So I said, this will help me to be productive. That's very important to tie that in. And that's actually going to come into play with some other things that we're going to talk about as well. So when you're going in to ask for an accommodation or to tell somebody something that you need, that's where you start, right there. And the same thing can apply, for instance, with people from different religions who may have particular garb that they need to wear. Not every company has a dress code that is conducive to that, or they may have I apologize for the little technical glitch. They may have something that they ask you to wear, something like that. The best thing that you can do if somebody asks you about something that you're wearing, if it is something that is needed for your comfort, if it is something to do with your religion, whatever it is, you can simply say to them, yes, this is something that I wear because XYZ. And then just kind of keep marching with it. If you don't make it a big deal, they won't. Don't make a big stink about it. If you can make a joke about something to make somebody more comfortable, if it's something about a physical or a neurodiversity, something like that, sometimes I'll say, if I'm having some facial tics, which is something that happens with my seizure disorder, sometimes I'll kind of be doing that, or I wink at people. And if I'm doing the winking, I'll say something like, hey, I'm so happy to be here today. I just wanted to let you know I am having a little bit of facial tics today. I'm perfectly fine. And I just wanted to let you know I'm not trying to pick you up for a date. I am not actually winking at you. This is just something that happens from time to time. And we have a good laugh and we keep on rolling. So that sense of humor can also be something that's a good pain point alleviator, and that kind of makes them feel comfortable, because sometimes people are worried about you. And that's why things kind of go south. It's not so much a bias of they don't think you could do a job. They're actually concerned about you. So sometimes it's good to use those kinds of things. When it comes to racial discrimination in the interview process. So this is something else that I get asked about a whole lot. And clearly, I am not racially diverse. So I've never personally experienced it, but I've certainly witnessed it a lot. I have a dear friend who has walked into multiple interviews and had people gasp, literally audibly gasp, because they did not realize that she was Black by her name. Again, weird biases that people have, right? So if you can tell that someone is shocked by how you look, or by your race, maybe your gender even. I've also had some conversations with people who somebody misunderstood their gender because of their name. Maybe it was a name that could be used for either or is more common for the other sex. And so they were misunderstood as people came in. I should have said sex, excuse me, not gender. My apologies. So as that happens, if somebody seems surprised, or says, let's start with the surprise aspect, actually. Let's just start there. So when that happens, the best thing that you can do is ignore it. Don't give it any validation. Just smile at them and just keep on marching and let them know how awesome you are. Just keep on flying. Giving power to that reaction will actually make it worse. So the human mind will give it more attention if it's validated. If it's not validated, the brain goes, oh, guess we made a mistake, and kind of keeps marching on for the most part. There are some people who are that will just sit there and mull it over in their brain instead of listening to you. But for the most part, humans will just sort of dismiss it at that point and keep on going. And that's a great way to overcome a bias that has to do with your physical appearance. Another one is if somebody overtly says something to you in an interview. This happens. This can be anything from hairstyle to a you people comment to something along the lines of, for instance, I had a friend that said that someone said, oh, I know this great taco place. Oh, but I guess you know a better one, because she was from Mexico. Gross. Not something that should be said. And the best way to handle that is to look at them and go, no, you know what? I really don't think about that, but thank you. And just kind of keep going. It lets them know, no, thank you, and sets an appropriate boundary, while also not shaming them, because if it may have been unintentional, you may not want to shame them and you may want to continue with the interview. There's a lot of, so unconscious bias happens when the brain has just developed false sense of information or poor sense of information that have not been countered. So you see this a lot actually with the media. So I just did a talk recently about neurodiversity and kind of the impacts from media. And one of the things that happens is that people will be afraid of different mental health diagnoses or neurodiversities because of what they see in movies. So for instance, DID, dissociative identity disorder, formerly known as multiple personalities, a lot of people are afraid of that because of how the media has portrayed it, from movies like Psycho to movies like Split. It's always portrayed as something scary, when in fact, there is nothing predatory or scary about the vast majority of the DID community. In fact, a lot of them are actually very afraid of other people. So fear and insecurity actually tends to run rampant because of their very kind of extreme condition. And so there's nothing to be afraid of, but people have that bias, or they hear schizophrenia and they get afraid because of what they've read, or something along those lines. So the bias can be sitting there due to poor information. So the key is to give new information. So another great thing that you can do is to overcome those kinds of statements. So for instance, if somebody said something to you like, hey, it's kind of like what happened to my friend about the tacos. You might say, well, you know what? Believe it or not every Mexican person likes tacos. I really don't know where they serve any, but thanks for the recommendation on the restaurant. And then just kind of keep going, give them some new information. It'll actually kind of help reset. They may actually have follow-up questions. I've had that happen to me. I've had people say, oh, you're bipolar, your moods must be erratic. And I'll say, oh, no, actually, we have very long highs and very long lows. And you can very easily learn how to manage those. We're actually not erratic people by nature. And so by diagnosis. And so that's kind of some new information. And then they might have, a little follow-up. So if you're comfortable, not everyone is, and that's perfectly okay. You can also choose to exercise, to give them an actual intellectual exercise and kind of teach them a little bit, as opposed to just avoiding the topic as well. Another great way to overcome bias is to teach, because it actually does retrain their brain. It actually gives them some new information. And you don't want to say it's sassy, right? You don't want to do the nice, nasty thing with that. You just want to kind of gently educate, just a gentle little statement in the right direction. So then another common type of discrimination is parenthood. And this is a big one for women. So sorry, guys, this may not apply to you too much. Hopefully not. Hopefully you're not experiencing this. But ladies, I know this is very common for us. I'm actually not a mother, and I've had weird discriminatory things said to me over the years about that, such as, what's wrong with you? Literally had somebody ask me that. Oh, I'm so sorry was a response, which was real interesting, just assuming that I needed children in my life. I've had people ask, oh, you must, something about my health. You're like, oh, you must be unhealthy, things like that. Just weird things kind of popped into their heads. And I know plenty of mothers who have had things asked like, oh, so, how often do you call out to go to a doctor's appointment? Or do you have reliable childcare? Things like this. People tend to be very discriminatory towards parents. So a few things. Number one, I will tell you just honestly, you don't need to be talking about your kids in your interview. If you briefly bring them up, like once in a story, like, hey, my kids and I were out, blah, 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 and you just kind of run on and tell a different story, that's fine. You should not be having in-depth conversations or repeated mention of your children. What that communicates, and there have actually been some studies about this type of thing. When something is mentioned repeatedly, people take it in as a priority of the person who's communicating to them. So if you mention your kids over and over and over and over again, what they're hearing is, I'm not interested in the job, I'm interested in my kids. And that's just what's happening in their brain. It may not even be conscious. So it's important not to over mention your children. Again, a fleeting mention, perfectly fine, absolutely okay. If they occasionally run through a Zoom and you want to make a joke about it in this day and age, hey, whatever, no problem, make a little joke, move on. But you don't want to overstress and talk about your kids. That's not appropriate. So first of all, don't do that. That's a great way to overcome bias. If somebody overtly asks, oh, another thing, make sure your profile picture on LinkedIn does not show your family. That's very strange. Your family is not who will be hired. You are. That's a profile for you. Family photos, great for maybe individual posts. They're great for on LinkedIn. They're great for Facebook. They're great for Instagram. All about it. Maybe not on your LinkedIn. Really not a very wise idea. Remember that that's a place to showcase you. So that's another big thing for overcoming that. And then if somebody does bring it up, then kind of the best thing to do is to say, this has never been a problem and I will always be able to do my job appropriately, and just kind of keep going, or effectively, or whatever word that you like to use, and just kind of keep on marching. That's something that's very important. Um, ageism. Ageism is a big one. So we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, talking about the application process. So in the interview process, I have seen all kinds of things, crazy things said and done to people when it comes to ageism. I've had people, talk about, oh, you must not be good at technology. It's a weird assumption. I've never understood that. My 87-year-old grandmother learned 2 brand new technologies during COVID. So I just can't even begin to fathom where people get that. So it is something that happens a lot. So one thing that you can do a few things that you can do to overcome ageism: show your energy. Make sure that you're smiling a lot, being participatory. And if smiling is not something that's comfortable for you due to some type of diversity, no problem. There are other ways to show your energy. You can move about. You can show excitement in the pitch of your voice. That's very important. And you can use energetic words like, I was running towards this, or I was so excited to achieve this goal. A lot of very kind of visual verbs will really help with that. So show energy in the way that you communicate. The same can also be done on your resume, by the way. Using energetic words is highly helpful when it comes to ageism. Another thing that you can do is talk about how you're continuing to learn. So again, we're trying to reprogram the unconscious bias or maybe even the conscious bias of, I think that all people who are over this age don't know new technologies. They can't be trained. They have bad habits, blah, blah, blah. We're going to give them new information. So actively talk about the new things that you learn, the new things that you do, the things that you're looking forward to learning, some plans that you have that are career focused, things like that. Let them know that your mind is still very much focused on your career. Anything that you could do to sort of reprogram those. So think about some of the things that people have said or done with you and reprogram those. The same thing works for basically everything. Just reprogram those biases, just beat them. So gender, again, going back to that. So you'll have people that will say things to you like, sometimes you might have to move some things. I know, you're a woman, but is that something you're comfortable with? Yeah, I moved a whole office of furniture in high heels one time. So yeah, I'm good. Thank you. So just anything that you can say. So if you know that there is a physical aspect to a job and somebody might look at you and go, I don't know if they can keep up. Again, this could go back to ageism. Maybe they're afraid you can't walk all day, something like that. Talk about something like, hey, I walk my dog multiple times a day, something like that. Bring something up. Talk about things you've done in your past. Hey, I go out and visit 50 businesses a day as a sales guy. Just whatever it is, just go in and talk about the things that you've done and things that you want to do that counteract that thought process in their minds. That's a huge, huge part of this is reprogramming what they're thinking and not allowing them to focus on those biases. Just completely focus on what they can do. And I will tell you, my number one tip for overcoming bias is to wow them with how awesome you are in general. People will get over so much if they think that you can really help them out and if they get excited about you. I have seen the most prejudiced hiring managers just completely get over it. I once had a guy that I swear to you was one of the worst right-wing white supremacist crazy people I've ever seen. This is back when I was working for a W-2 job in a company. And this guy hired an elderly Muslim woman, and I could not believe it. I was completely flabbergasted. And it is because, as much as he liked to only hire people that looked like him, which he was eventually fired for, by the way, um, he looked at her and he was just wildly impressed. He had to get over everything because she just wowed him. And I'm not saying that you have to just be, overly spectacular all the time. That's not what I'm saying. But showcase your expertise all the time. Bring everything back to what you can do for them. So if they start to derail, ask questions like, so what do you do on the weekends? Trying to learn about your personal life. Like, do you have kids? What's your sexuality? Are you married? Things like that they shouldn't be asking. Go ahead and refocus it and take it right back to what you can do. And say something like, so if they ask about your weekends, you can say, you know what, I love to relax and unwind so that I can come back Monday and do yada, 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 whatever it is that you do that you kick butt at. That's what you want to focus on. So bring everything back to how you can help them and your excitement about what you can do. And again, excitement does not mean that you need to constantly smile, that you need to constantly be the common version of excited, right? Everybody's excitement can look different. But you need to show that energy for them and kind of gear everything that way. So those are some of the kind of basics. So then I also wanted to touch on the Lbgtqia discrimination very briefly, because this is one that happens so much, so much when we get to the interview process. So a woman will reference her wife, a man will reference his husband. Someone may reference, the fact that they're trans, something may come out about the fact that they're trans. It's something that can take people aback. It's something about which people can get very nasty. I've seen people that actually refuse physical contact after that. Not anybody I've worked with, but I have seen it happen. I've heard about it other times. I've seen people that go, oh, what do you mean? Or say, oh, you're one of those people, that kind of thing. So I want to kind of take a minute and address that. Or same thing with religion. Actually, I have seen people do that. I once had a candidate who was a Hasidic Jew, and he went in for an interview and was in his full dress, and they had a very physical reaction to that, and basically just let him know that he was not going to get the job. And they didn't say it was because he was a Hasidic Jew, but it was made very, very clear, because until they saw him, they were extremely excited about him. And they had a very physical reaction when they saw him. So this can apply to other things as well. But if there is a distinct prejudice and someone feels unsafe, something like that, if it's that extreme, nothing positive is going to come out of it. Just go ahead, wrap it up as quick as you can and get out of there. I wish I could tell you that there was a magic cure to make people not be awful, but there's just not. There's just not. So when that happens, get out of there, report them if you feel comfortable. You can always reach out to me, especially if you're in the US or Canada. I will help you do that. Or I will point you to the right person if I know somebody who's a specialist with that. But sometimes you just can't fix awful. You just can't. So you just have to be comfortable moving on, as much as it stinks and as much as it's going to hurt. You have to just let it go. It does happen. It does. Now, again, if it's a more mild reaction, and let's say it's about sexuality, and they get embarrassed and they get uncomfortable, they say, oh, and maybe they said, hey, do you and your wife, and because you mentioned that you're married, and you say, oh, it's my husband and I, and they go, oh gosh, I'm so sorry, oh, blah, 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 kind of start stumbling. Just make them feel comfortable. And the same thing can apply with religion, gender, all kinds of other neurodiversities. If somebody says something and they very clearly didn't mean to be offensive, that type of thing. Just make them feel comfortable. And when you do that, when you show them that grace, that will actually overcome a lot as well. Whereas if you just let it sit there and let it be awkward, it's going to stick in their minds. They're going to feel uncomfortable with you, and that will make them back off as a potential employer from you as a candidate. So just give them some grace. If you can tell it was accidental, give them grace. It's no big deal. Just so you know, this is my preferred pronoun. This is, or yes, I am, married to somebody of the same sex, or yes, I am this gender or this faith or whatever it is. And I understand it's easy to make the mistake. No worries. And then just kind of keep going. So give them a little bit of grace with that kind of thing. It's a very, there's so many different diversities on it. People are still, and now there's so much work in this space that people are trying to do better, but they're just not always getting it right. So we do need a little bit of grace too. And I know it can be hard, but just need a little bit of grace. So basically I just kind of want to run through everything. So, because I kind of gave some stories all along the way. So I want to run through it. So it's very simple. So starting with your resume, use action verbs and talk about accomplishments in your resumes. Action verbs show energy and get everybody kind of focused on the right type of direction. I recommend not mentioning anything about, again, some of this changes for certain countries, but depending on what country you're in, don't mention your religion, don't mention your family status, anything like that. It does generate bias. So give yourself as much of a clean slate as possible, just to let them get to know you as a potential employer first, so that so that they can get excited about you first, and then kind of learn everything else as they go, and so that their focus will be on the right thing. You want to keep them focused on the professional elements, because that's what matters. So leave off anything like that. Remove any dates for school if that's something that's allowed in the country that you're in. Make sure that any gaps of employment, if there's something that you did, do not list it in the employment section, but maybe talk about volunteer work that you did, talk about any classes that you took, put those on your resume, and that will kind of explain what was going on in that gap. If there's nothing professional, just be prepared to own it. Just be prepared. Keep in mind that it's nobody's business what you were doing, because it wasn't professional, but they're still going to ask. So just let them know, hey, I took some personal time, and then just keep on going. Or I had something come up in my family, everything is resolved now, and then keep on going. Whatever it is that you want to tell them, you don't need to give them your life story. Nobody's entitled to that. This is about work. So give them a brief, concise explanation and just keep going. Don't change your name. Never change your name. Be proud of your name. If you like it, if you don't, maybe change it, but don't change it to avoid discrimination. Okay. Be you and be proud to be you. Make sure that, also, this is one thing that a lot of people think of, make sure that your resume is friendly to other people who might be reading it. So consider physical and neurodiversities when you're making your resume. Be careful with a whole bunch of colors, be careful with italics, be careful with font size, things like that. So also be considerate the other way around. Then as you move into maybe needing to talk about accommodations, make sure that you only bring it up when it needs to actually happen. This can just kind of create a sense. If you bring it up at a time when it's not needed, it kind of leaves this weird, awkward feeling of, okay, why did they tell me this? Why is this being made a big deal of? And just so that there are people out there that will try to sue a company to try to bait them into doing something discriminatory to sue them. So that may make a company feel like that's what you're doing. So only bring up your accommodations as you need them. If you already have a solution, offer it. That always helps. If you have a solution to a problem that you bring up, always, and not that needing an accommodation is a problem, but it is something that needs a solution. So anytime that you can provide that, that's always smart. And you don't need to over-explain. They don't need to know your diagnosis necessarily. Now, if you want to share it, fine. I don't mind sharing mine. Some people do. A lot of people do mind sharing, and that's okay. So you don't need to give a life story. Just tell them a very simple 1 to 2 sentence as to why you need it and what you need very specifically. And don't be general. Like, don't say, hey, I have a hard time hearing. What can we do about that? Too general. Be very specific about what it is that you need. As you move through the interview process and somebody brings up something, and something comes up about your diversity, if it's physical or neuro, and you need maybe an accommodation, also feel free to maybe make a joke to make it more light, like I did with my little tics and with my face. It just makes people feel more comfortable, like they don't need to help you. I have a very good friend with cerebral palsy who will make some jokes about, just don't give me a coffee mug because I don't want to spill coffee on you. It just kind of lightens the mood, lets them know that you're comfortable, you're safe, you're okay. So feel free to do that as well. And then moving into your physical appearance, if it's something that that people are shocked by, just make sure that you may give a little quick, if it's not a repulsion response, but just a kind of surprise, you can kind of just address it real quick. Go, oh, I don't really look like my name, or, oh, yes, I'm sure you weren't expecting a Hasidic Jew like my one client. Oh, no, just this is just what I wear, no problem, and then just kind of dive into it, or this is just my faith, and just kind of dive into it. Again, kind of putting their minds at ease. If there's a misconception that they spout out, that's something incorrect about you, go ahead and correct them, but not in a nice, nasty way, or not in a straight up nasty way. Just correct that bias. Take the time to educate. So, for instance, I have a friend whose son is autistic, and if somebody says something to him that's incorrect, he'll say, well, actually, this is something about me, and that this is true for a lot of autistic people. And he just gives them a little fact, just a little, the more you know kind of situation. So educate people. Actually counteract those biases and whatever it is going on. So if you're over a certain age and people think you won't have energy, or that you can't learn anything, or if you're super young and people think you don't know anything, or if you're, a woman and they think you're weak, or, whatever it is, counteract that. Tell stories, give examples that will automatically, without them saying anything, doing anything, without you specifically addressing it, will counteract that. So if they think that, you are over a certain age, so you're going to be too physically slow, talk about how you go jogging on the weekends, or talk about how you play with kids at church on Sunday, and you watch those kids, or that can also talk about your religion a little, but or you go, you babysit kids or whatever like that, and you play with them and you keep up with them. If you jog, or you play with your dog, I have a 200-pound dog and I wrestle him to the ground all the time. Great. I know you're physically capable of doing something. Give examples. If it's about learning, talk about how you've learned this and that recently, how you plan to learn more. And don't wait until they bring it up as an issue. Just fit this stuff in. Just talk about it. Just go ahead, think about what are some things that might cause a problem, that have caused a problem for you in the past, and just go ahead and counteract that. Teach their brain, give it new information so that it doesn't have a chance to focus on that bias. And then ultimately, if people are gross, you're just going to have to walk away. Also, maybe feel free to report them. That's something I'm a very big advocate for. Also, feel free to stand up for yourself. I'm going to also give you that message. A lot of people won't tell you that. They'll say, oh, you should be so nice to them. Oh, you should just walk away. I'll never burn a bridge. Okay, if somebody is overtly gross to you, there is no bridge to be saved. There is no salvaging here. So if you want to look at them and say, I really don't appreciate that remark, that was very offensive, and then just walk away, you are well within your right. Well within your right. Please feel free to stand up for yourself. So that's kind of the basics of my presentation. I'm used to kind of having a little bit more back and forth and people telling me what they want to know. So I hope you found a lot of great information in this little talk and didn't get too tired of my voice going the whole time. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask them now. And also I'll ask our the gentleman who's handling our tech, if you see anything that's dropped in a comment that you'd like me to address, please let me know. Anybody have any
I,
questions? Yes.
Catherine, I do have a question. I am 40 plus, and most of the friends are getting closer to 50,
Okay.
and they feel like they are not once they submit the resume to the let's say client's hiring manager or client's technical recruiter or something, their profiles are not moving forward. So what do you suggest in order to people can't even though we can hide the age in the application process, they know how many years of experience we do have in the resume, and then they would be knowing our age, and kind of that's kind of a bottleneck for the people getting closer to 50. So what kind of suggestion do you give?
So here's what I would say to that. One of the best things that I've ever seen work very well to counter ageism in terms of there's kind of two different pieces to this. The resume is to start, I was talking about action verbs and accomplishments, things like that. Have a section at the top of your resume. You could do it as a skills section. You can do it as kind of a summary with some bullet points and highlight those accomplishments and highlight those energy points, where you can talk about, for instance, I led this project and we finished 3 months ahead of schedule and yada, yada, just very brief, concise bullet points of one sentence or less, but keep them very action pointed so that it's the first thing they see when they look at your resume is the awesome stuff that you've done, and kind of just really really put that at top, maybe label it accomplishments, that kind of thing. So give them those action points first. Second, I do want to hit on this again. Don't go back more than 10 years in your resume, because even if they know that it's something, unless you're in a situation where you're required to, limit that as much as possible, because older than that isn't really relevant anyway. In most cases, and in most countries, people don't really care, but after 10 years anyway, so limit that. And if you have to put it on your resume, again, the action points are important. The other piece that's really important that a lot of people miss is how the recruiter presents you. So you've got to give them things that will get them excited about you. So if you've spoken to the recruiter and they really like you and they're going to send you over, I would specifically say to them, hey, can you please make sure that you share with them X, Y, and Z? And give them some things to send over that are going to get those people super pumped. So for instance, if you're going to be a project manager and they want, that this is a time sensitive project, say, hey, I wound up my last 6 contracts at least 2 months early. Please make sure that they know that. It's just things like that will actually really help. That's about the best I can give you. Outside of that, eventually they're going to figure out your age. And then it's just, again, showing the energy and that kind of thing when you get to the interview. But that's the best I've got for you right now. Ageism's a tough one.
That's the that's a cool idea. I'll just put the I'll inform them to just put the latest 10 years, and then if somebody asks they can tell them that it's not. Yeah, I got the important part here. Yeah. Thank you, Catherine.
You're very welcome. Any other questions, or even things specific to you that you've personally experienced that you want to share and talk about? Hello?
Do you Catherine, I have another question. Let's say I'm putting on my profile, let's say they, them, or him, her, and I'm basically saying that I'm kind of a diverse person, right? Already in the LinkedIn space. And do you think that will have a negative effect on people looking at hiring me?
I don't think so. I really don't. Again, unless they're just a really overtly crummy human, I really don't think so. That's becoming a very, very common thing. I even had, this is a true story. I had a former client who self-identified himself as a country. He called himself very specifically a country redneck, which is almost like saying the same thing twice. And so very kind of didn't understand diversity, all that. We kind of did some work at that space, and he even was cool with the whole pronoun thing. So he got to the point, he read up on it a little bit, was like, oh, okay, this is a cool thing, and then just kind of went on. I don't think it's really going to affect you too much now.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. Yeah,
and I like that you're doing that.
Yeah. I do have, yeah, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions, thoughts, comments, anything like that? No? Okay. Well, what I'm going to tell everybody then is please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. You'll see the spelling of my name right here on the screen, Katherine McCord. I'm very easy to find. I'm one of like 3 Katherine McCords with the spelling on LinkedIn. Super, super simple to find. I am in the US. I'm located in Florida. So that's another way to filter and make sure that you found me. Please feel free to connect with me, reach out, ask questions, tell me stories. If you want help with something, please feel free to reach out. Again, if something crummy happens to you and you want to report somebody, please reach out to me. If it's in an area that I am uncomfortable making a recommendation, I'll connect you with someone I know that does know how to answer your question. So I will always be here to be a resource for you. And that's pretty much it. So reach out to me, connect, let me know any way that I can support you. And thank you very much, everyone. Have a wonderful, wonderful week. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Catherine.